Hey, I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Give this video a like.
Check out our podcast below in the description.
How about this, Middlecoff? Shanahan versus Pete Carroll. Pete's won 105 games as the Seahawks coach. If Shanahan wins, it will get him to 500 as the 49ers coach. He's 27-28. So in the grand scheme of his career, maybe this game gets forgotten in some way, but this is a big one. He deserves to be a 500 coach, I think. So
he does. And it got off to a pretty rocky start for Kyle, right?
Yeah.
What was it 6-10, skewed by those Jimmy wins? Next year, disaster when Jimmy tore his ACL and they have the number 2 pick in the draft. It always feels good, though, when you have a nice 13-3 season, huh?
It does.
It swings that career record.
I saw the Niners had some notes in their media release, like the last 2 years. Like the last 2 years, the 49ers lead the league in this and that. And I'm like, well, those are great numbers, but last year and this year are two very different years because you're right. Last year was something different entirely.
You know how when they talk about Mike Tomlin, one of the most impressive stats for Mike Tomlin is once he gets the job, I think in 2007, he's never had a losing season. Now he's had several 8-8 seasons, but that's an incredible, stretch of football.
Yeah.
You can't say the same thing for Pete with Seattle, but I do think it's fair to say Pete with Russell that's an era in itself. Because Tomlin, once he got to Pittsburgh, he's never not had Ben. I guess until like last year, and he's been injured seasons for a small period of time, but his quarterback, it'd be like if you're judging Mike McCarthy, he had Aaron Rodgers. Once Aaron Rodgers, like that was the Mike McCarthy that gets judged, right?
Right.
He inherited Brett Favre, but when we talk about Mike McCarthy, I don't think Brett Favre. Do you? Like when I think Pete Carroll, I don't think that first couple years before Russell showed up. I think Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll,
right?
And they have, and I guess what I was going to use the Mike Tomlin, they've never had even a 500 season together. They've only won, and their worst season. Wow. Remember, we always talk about that quote from John Schneider, it felt like we went 2-14. The year they went 9-7. So it just shows you, to me, the standard of which they just rattle off double-digit seasons. It's, they probably, maybe because it's the brand, they're a little newer. They should be talked about like Baltimore, like Pittsburgh, and like Green Bay. It's shorter period of time, but what they've accomplished, Guy, is fucking phenomenal.
Well,
right?
And I think that's what we owe, obviously on the West Coast, because Pete had SC too. That's what we owe Seattle, because what the Niners-Seahawks was when Harbaugh was the Niners coach was the best. It was kind of an AFC Steelers, Ravens, Steelers, in its day, Browns or Bengals, whatever. But that's what it was. It's the best West Coast football rivalry of, I would say, the 2000s. And what's amazing, and this is where Shanahan gets credit, I think, right, is the Niners went through a stretch where they lost 10 straight games to Seattle. Like, it was over. It was like, well, it was fun while it lasted. Harbaugh's gone. Seattle won 10 in a row. That's not a rivalry. That's Bengals-Steelers. Like, that's not a rivalry anymore. And I think what's made it good again, obviously they've played in games that mattered, like you talked about the Week 17 game. But doesn't it kind of feel like Kyle is an offensive coach that feels like a defensive coach, and Pete is a defensive coach that feels like an offensive coach? Like,
that's a great analogy. Yes,
right? To me, they match. The same way Harbaugh was an offensive coach that felt like a defensive coach. But the one thing about Pete, big games, his teams show up. And we haven't had nearly I'm not comparing Kyle's resume to Pete's in terms of like production. But I think for the most part, we can say the last year and a half, and especially last year solidified this, when Kyle's team is in a big game, like they're going to show up physically to play, by and large. We've seen it. So I just think these guys are a match, and it does feel like the whole thing's back.
If you are watching a Seattle game, with especially women that just do not watch football. But, a lot of girls, Vrabel's on the screen. They're like, damn, who's that? Pete is a guy, just his activity on the sideline.
Alyssa did it this last week.
If you point him out and you go, how old do you think he is? I got a number late 50s. Guy, he's 69 years old.
He and Bill are the same age, right?
I think he's a year older than Bill.
Okay.
I think Bill's 68. He is 29 years older than Kyle. But if you just put him and Kyle together, I would imagine you get a non-football person that you could just, 15 years apart, especially if you meet Pete or see him. You and I have been on the sideline. when Seattle has played the Niners and been up close to them. His body type,
I think it's just he you know the word vibe gets overused, but he is just he is just putting out vibe, just young guy vibe all day long.
Big time. And that first year, you could almost throw it out. Obviously, they had a stretch from 14 to 17 where they did not lose a game to the Niners. Russ and Pete, 8-0. Just every year 2-0 against them. In 17, though, Kyle's first year, both those games were played without Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right.
And when the next 2 years, they also played Seattle without Jimmy Garoppolo because he got hurt in 18. But the Niners won one of those games. And obviously last year they split and Jimmy won the last game, the most important game to win them the division. But in 18, if you remember, the Niners went there late in the season. Your boy right here was dead set on losing out. And I was not – that game could have fucked them, right, for Nick Bosa. Because if they had got the third or fourth pick, the Raiders or the Jets would have taken Nick Bosa and the Niners would not have Nick Bosa. And who knows the way the Super Bowl year played out. But they got lucky. And it's still the cookie crumbled. They got the number 2 overall pick. But I do think when you look at the last 2 years, the Niners have played really well against Seattle. That you'd say in 19, when both teams were really good, those 2 games were fantastic. I mean, one game went to the final second of overtime, and the other game went to the final second of regulation. And for a split second, I remember we did a podcast right after. For about the last minute and a half of the game when Seattle was driving, I thought they were going to lose the game.
I remember. I remember very vividly where I was.
I remember kind of
pacing.
I was doing the Niners are going to lose the division after this season.
I was in a hotel in Eugene, Oregon, and I couldn't sit down.
So I mean, Kyle as a head coach is 4-2 against them, but the last 2 years they're 2-2 against the Seattle. So they're going to go into this game. It's not like when Kyle first got here, they were on completely different levels in a short period of time. Now, Seattle in a vacuum might be better than the Niners right now, but I do think Kyle Shanahan, when he walks into Seattle with his team, they view themselves as equals.
Yeah,
right?
And even his first year, they were on 2 different levels. They played a 12-9 game and a 24-13 game. Like, the 6 games they've played, the winning team has averaged 26 points and the losing team has averaged 18. And the last 3 meetings, it's been 27-24, 26-21, and then was the blowout the first meeting or the second meeting in 18? Either way, it was
the first one.
Was the blowout?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the last 3 meetings, 27-24, 26-21, 26-23.
And, I mean, just some big picture injuries. Chris Carson will not play this week. Deebo Samuel will not play this week. I think it's fair to say the Deebo Samuel injury for the Niners and Kyle is bigger than the Carson injury for Pete, Russ in Seattle. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, let's get into that. I agree with that, but I agree with that. I mean, Deebo. The problem for them is Chris Carson is they're down to 4. Marshawn Lynch could be on line 1 at this point.
I did think again it was against Arizona. I thought Carlos Hyde looks pretty solid.
Yeah, but he's hurt.
NFL player. Another thing I wrote down on the 2 franchises, Pete, John Schneider, and just while they've had Russ. I'd say them and, a small handful of teams, maybe Belichick, are just do the most holy shit, they just did that, right? They've done a ton of huge trades.
Yeah.
They just did one this year, which is by far the biggest holy shit trade of the year, right? Jamal Adams for 2 1s and a 2. I remember where I was when that happened. That was no, I honestly, I didn't believe it. I was it's a fake Adam Schefter. But they have done that over the years with Jimmy Graham, with Percy Harvin, trade back in the draft. When I think Pete Carroll, when I think John Schneider – with Russell Wilson, I think they just throw everything at the kitchen sink.
Yeah.
Last year, Clowney, they do whatever it takes. The Niners, wouldn't you say, in a short period of time, have taken some pretty bold moves? I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo was somewhat handed to him, but boom, they made that trade in 30 minutes.
The Emmanuel Sanders trade.
Emmanuel Sanders, D Ford. While it didn't work, they did just go all in.
Trent Williams.
They've proven to be very, very aggressive with big name players as well, and I think Kyle has some similarities with Pete and Schneider there that I think he kind of likes it. Now, They got to be, I'd say, what they like. I think Pete likes a little bit more of a crazy motherfucker, and Kyle kind of likes something that he feels fits his culture, but they go after some big fish. That's for damn sure.
And part of this, right, is he's got a Pete disciple, Robert Saleh, so defensively they like the same type of players too.
Yeah, I mean, would you
Although
say
you
Richard?
Wouldn't know it watching the Niners. necessarily their DBs right now. But
Is Sherman the most famous Seattle player of the last decade, not Russell Wilson? Sherman or
is he
Marshawn,
the
maybe?
most famous? You're saying
Or no, maybe I put that wrong.
non-Russ? I would say
the most synonymous with the franchise.
Yeah, he might be. His moment was so
one-
big. Russ is Sierra quarterback,
Well, yeah.
but-
Well, no. Russ is number one
you're
by a
taking
mile.
Russ
I'm
out.
just saying,
I got you.
yeah, I'm saying who would be the next guy? I'd say it'd be Sherman or Marshawn.
Yeah,
But the Niners have him, so it's just now he's not playing now, but he's that's kind of crazy though.
but the Niners' number one guy is Kittle, and he's kind of the same type of just face of the franchise, force of personality, right?
Yeah, it's just
There's a lot of parallels.
yeah, there are.